My name is Barry Loveland, and I'm here to conduct an oral history interview on behalf of the LGBT Center of Central Pennsylvania. Today is Saturday, July 29th, 2017, and we're here in Harrisburg, and I'm interviewing Robert Sevensky. And Bob, do we have your permission to record the interview today?
Yes.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity to interview you. I know you've been away from the area for a while, but you're back here for a visit, and we're glad to be able to have this chance to catch up with you and talk about your life story. So, Great. Why don't we begin at the beginning? Where and when were you born?
I was born in Scranton, Pennsylvania on September 6th, 1948, which is Labor Day, which makes my birthday a movable feast.
Tell me about your family of origin, your parents, siblings.
Sure. Right. My parents were the children of immigrants, and both of them grew up in the Depression and were really marked by that. My father's family, both my families' trees go back to Eastern Europe and Poland, Ukraine, depending on where the boundaries were at the time. My father was basically a laborer, though he ended up working for Sears and ended up in a managerial position. But like many people, he had to quit school in order to make a living. He quit school after third grade to work around the mines, and my mother quit after sixth grade to work as a domestic, and that was, again, not all uncommon. And they were remarkably literate people, and my father particularly, he was a great writer, and both were readers, and that was interesting. And I had two siblings, both older, a brother who was 7 years older and a sister who was 6 years older. And my sister's still alive. My brother died about a year ago. And we grew up in a kind of a lower income area along the Lackawanna River, which flooded when I was about 7 years old, and so it's interesting being along the banks of the Susquehanna. And there was a kind of urban renewal, and the area was pretty much just cleared out, and we all kind of scattered. But I'm really grateful to have grown up into what was a pretty ethnically rich, diverse area for Scranton. In any event, it was there were a lot of Jewish community around me, people of many different countries of origin, as well as folks like me who are second generation Americans. So.
How about schools?
I went to public schools, and that was in seventh grade. I went to the big junior/senior high school, West Scranton, and on the whole, it was not a bad experience. I just went to my 50th high school reunion last September, and it was joyous. I was surprised. It was really one of those kind of markers in my interior biography, and got to see people, some who I never talked to in school but now did, and and the fact that we survived, I think, was the big equalizer of it all. Many of our classmates had died, so it was a big class, but still shocking. So, and then I went after high school. I went on to college. I went because of the economic issues. I decided to stay at home and commuted to the University of Scranton for 2 years. But early on, realized that I needed to get out of Scranton, so I went to Europe for a year as my junior year and lived in Belgium and studied there. And was going to stay on there, but my mother developed a terminal illness, and so I stayed with her for the last year of college, and she died my first year in graduate school. So that was the kind of container of it. I was a philosophy major. I started as an English major. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, so that seemed vague enough. And in the end, I ended up going on to get a doctorate in philosophy and taught, and that's what brought me to Central Pennsylvania. There was an ad in the New York Times. That's how people got jobs in those days, and they needed someone quickly at Penn State's Medical Center in Hershey to teach the psychology of religion. And a friend said, "You're as close as they're going to get, so why don't you try?" And I did, and I got the job, and I ended up staying on there for 8 years. It was during that period that I became involved with both the larger Central Pennsylvania community and Harrisburg, both the lesbian gay community and also other groups, church groups, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Tell me about in your childhood. At what point did you feel like you were different, or if you knew what gay was, or whatever?
Right. After years of psychotherapy, I realized that I was different and on the margins of my family pretty early on. I had left the family, in some way psychologically before I left it physically. But I started recognizing that around the age of 11 or 12, I would think that I knew, maybe even before then, that I was gay and attracted to men, boys really at that age. But it was so formless in a way. I mean, those first longings were simply longings and a desire for to be with someone, to be near someone, to share in their energy, and realize that was the energy I had, so that was, as I said, about the age of 12. I also started having my first sexual experiences around those ages with another student in my school, and they continued off and on through junior high school and into high school, but that was the extent of it. Although I have to laugh because I was in a Boy Scout troop, a church-sponsored Boy Scout troop, and our little patrol was simply very gay. We ended up calling ourselves the Cuckoos, and we were odd, and we were different, and it was okay to be different. And I'm so grateful for those micro communities where it was possible to be different, to explore the kinds of boundaries and interior desires, that happened there. That happened also in church for me, and church became a kind of container for the exploration of myself, including my sexuality. So I was an altar boy, and I was not raised in a Catholic church, but in a church that was very similar to it, the Polish National Catholic Church, and so the same kind of dynamics. Sexuality wasn't talked about much, and if it was not with a lot of approving. Though I remember going to a church camp once, and a young seminarian giving a talk on the dangers of nautical emissions instead of nocturnal emissions. So, but by 16, certainly maybe about 16, I went to, there's a big Roman Catholic shrine in Scranton called St. Anne's, and I remember visiting there. I was always poking in my head in churches and other places, and they had these petitions that you give to St. Anne. And they had so many of them that had them on little cards, and you could check it off. And there was one, "Dear St. Anne, send me a Catholic boyfriend or a Catholic girlfriend." So I checked off Catholic boyfriend, and she did. So I've been grateful to her over the years. The other thing that was interesting in my life was I have an uncle. He's still alive. And my last uncle, he's 92, who is gay. Though we didn't talk about it, he modeled a way of being different. That it was okay not to be married. It was okay to have a circle of male friends, which were always there at family gatherings, always, these 3 or 4 or 5 guys, they were simply part of the family. I don't know how anybody looking at it couldn't have seen what it was, but it was seen and unseen, and it was it, it was a good model for me, I think. And my Uncle Dick told me years later that when I was about 6, there was this guy who really ran the Salon Society in the 40s in Scranton, the 1940s, which was the only way you could really be gay. There were a few night spots, and into the 50s. And he saw me and he said to Dick, "She's one of us." So, and I look on those things as real blessings, that I had models, even if they weren't conscious models, about how could I navigate my life, how could I go forward with this, so I could get back to a story about Uncle Dick, or I could tell it now.
If you want.
Sure. But after my time in central Pennsylvania, I was 36 and wasn't getting tenure. And I had always been fascinated by monastic life and wrote to a monastery when I was 17, but life happened. But I finally decided at 36 that I was going to try it and do it. My Uncle Dick heard about it, and when I was visiting, he said to me, took me aside, he said, "What's all this I hear about you picking beans with those nuns?" And I said, I just, it's something I've always kind of wanted. I don't know why. I can't explain it. I would probably explain it now in Jung's archetypal terms. But he said, when I got out of the Second World War, he was drafted like in 1944 when he was 18. He said, I wanted to be a ballet dancer. And he said, to be a ballet dancer in those days was to be queer, and I was. And he said, I didn't think I could take the heat. And he said, I've regretted it to this day. He said, I go to a dance performance and I wonder if that could have been ever me on that stage. So he said, I'm not religious. He said, but he said, if you feel like you have to do this, you need to do it, or you'll end up going to the grave asking yourself if you should have. And I felt that was also one of the kind of go-ahead signals to me, that this was part of a larger story. And I was so grateful for him to tell me that story about how many of us have regrets. Yeah. We all have regrets at our various levels in our lives. Right. So that's the end of the Uncle Dick saga, I think.
So how did you sort of start your coming out process?
Well, there was an issue of Life magazine that was published in 1960s, before Stonewall. It would be about 65, 64, and it was about homosexuals. And there were pictures of various kinds of people as they were imagined by Life magazine, and there was a picture of a leather bar in San Francisco, and I got that issue of Life, and I hid it away. And I would refer to it, and I said, oh my God, there are other people out there like me, and it had to be because Life magazine said it, and that was like the authority. It's like Wikipedia, and so I started to understand myself more self-consciously as a homosexual man. The word gay really wasn't quite there yet. It was and it wasn't. So I saw
that would have been about age 16 or 17.
That would have been around age 16 as well, yeah. And so it started to become an identity, but there was no way to play it out. So I basically did not, around that time too, any of the sexual experiment with his friends stopped. And it wasn't until I went to Europe as a junior in college that I met another student from America. And we became, I wouldn't say lovers, we became what we used to call boyfriends. So maybe they still use that term. And that did not, in the end, pan out for the long term. That's a rather longer story. But it was a way where I actually could understand my sexuality in terms of interpersonal love and affection for another person, who reflected back to me interests and made life interesting, and it was wonderful to be in love. And everybody should do it at least once. And to be loved, and all that goes with that. So that's where I really started also to. That would be 68, 69. And that was also at the time of Stonewall. And that was also kind of being covered in the press and in the news, even though I was living in Europe. So I started getting a sense of that. And still, I was not out in any public way. There were one or two friends that I told, and they received it with various degrees of acceptance or horror. Then it wasn't until really I went to Boston for graduate school in 1970 that I started to go to gay bars, I must have walked around a block 100 times before I got the courage to go to something. But it wasn't a bar first that I went to. There was alternative newspapers in the area, the Boston Phoenix. It was just starting out, and there was an organization that was just founded, and it sounds like a communist front. It was called the Student Homophile League, and it met in the basement of a church on Beacon Hill, and that really was where I count my coming out at age 21. That I went into a identified gay space where other men were and women, and I was so shocked. I walked in the store and there were 75 or 100 college students, who knew? And I got involved with that organization. They had various activities and supported, the beginning of Gay Pride celebrations and observances in Boston. But it was also right at that time that my mother died, and I was going back and forth. I got real conflicted and anxious. It was just anxiety of life, and I had a kind of huge anxiety attack. And I went to a doctor, and he said, "You should talk to a counselor." And I ended up going into counseling at a gay-identified counseling service, which had just started up, called the Homophile Community Health Service. Homophile was a popular word right, in those days. Had worked with a therapist who was himself very involved in the gay community. And it was during that time that I met a friend who became a lover, and we were involved with the community, and there were coffee houses and newspapers, and I started attending Integrity at that time in Boston, which was starting up there, and which was a support community for gay and lesbian folk in the Episcopal Anglican tradition. And they all had good relationships with Dignity and MCC, and all of these worked together. I did was it a 2-year-long counseling training program out of the Homophile Community Health Service, and that also was very helpful. I did intake interviews for folks coming in, and felt that was what I could do as a graduate student. Then I was gay. And it's very funny because at that time, someone gave me, or I bought, a little pin that had like 2 male symbols on it. And I wore it back to Scranton on one of my visits, and my sister saw it, and she never said anything about it. But she said later, of course, when I saw that, I knew. And she said she'd probably known all along. So I was sending out these little signals very, very carefully. It was the early 70s, and there were people who did, suffer for being open. They still do, and so it was something people did with various degrees of caution. And one of my great episodes in my life during that time in Boston was that I had a group of friends. We would meet, I think it was Thursday night, at the Charles Street Meeting House, which was a kind of a gay coffee house. And we would have coffee and conversation, and then we would go to my apartment because it was nearest, and we'd watch Monty Python's Flying Circus, and then we would go out to a bar for drinks. And it was, over the course of 2 years, we did this every Thursday, and they were an amazing group of people, social workers and architects, and it was where I got the sense of community. That and through my church, I went when I was living in Boston. Went to a church that was a lot of gay people went to it, whether it was gay friendly or not. And that's another story. But the coffee hour was, and the people around it was also a place where you met week after week with the same people, who became part of your story. Who invited you to parties, and it was wonderful.
What denomination?
It was an Episcopal church,
so,
right?
Yeah.
It was the gnashing of teeth when the local Boston Phoenix newspaper named it the best cruising spot for gay men. The vestry was not pleased. But it was.
So how long were you in Boston?
I was in Boston for 8 years.
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
So
That's been a long time.
yeah. So.
And did you start your employment work in Boston, or?
I was, if you could call it that. I mean, I was a graduate student and was on fellowships, and then I got odd jobs, and I did some part-time teaching gigs. But it was really only 6 months after I got my doctorate that I got the job here in Central Pennsylvania.
Okay, yeah.
So.
Yeah. So then you moved to Central PA.
Yeah.
And how was it going from Boston back to a more rural part of Pennsylvania?
Yeah, more rural. And I lived, that first year, I lived in Palmyra on the other side of Hershey. And I just drove through it the other day, and I said, how did I survive? But I was busy with my work. But I started coming into to Harrisburg and went to some bars and met some people.
What were your recollections of the bars that you went to?
There was the, what is it up here? The the Rose.
The Rose.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And there was the place on North Street.
The Neptune.
Neptune's, yeah. And, I think it was Neptune's, yeah. And both of them I thought were gentle enough places. And people could go into them, and then there was a guy named Emil French. I don't know if you remember him.
Yeah.
And he was kind of the pro-mesta. He knew everybody. And he introduced me to people. And then I heard about Dignity and started coming to Dignity as a way of meeting people. Mm-hmm. And that became an important place to meet friends and to keep my mind on who I was. And within a few months, I realized I needed to move into Harrisburg. And as soon as my lease was up in Palmyra, I moved into Harrisburg and lived in the same place on the corner of Penn and Boas for the next 7+ years. So it was good.
About what year was it that you came to Harrisburg?
I would have come to Harrisburg in 86.
86.
No, I'm sorry. No. Correction. That's when I left.
Yes, yeah.
It would have been 78.
78.
Yeah, 78, 79.
Yeah.
And the other thing that happened was I ended up coming out at work in ways that I had not planned. I started this job. I was working in a medical school and working in a humanities faculty, teaching about the humanities and how they can shape medical practice. And it was really a pioneering program. And it got these huge government grants, so it really expanded. And the second week I was there, they were having a seminar on how to teach sex education to the medical students, and they asked me. One of the professors said, "Come join us," and so we're going around the table, and why is this topic important to you? And I was like the second person. I said, "Oh crap, here it goes." I said, "Well, I'm gay," and I said it's important that we make the medical community aware of the particular needs of gay and lesbian folk and others in the kind of larger non-traditional communities, right. And particularly in terms of sex education, and doctors need to be comfortable with the variety of sexual expressions, because many people are afraid to go to physicians because of a bias or judgmentalism. And I said, so it's important to do this. Well, so that led to me within a few weeks doing 2 programs on WITF. There was a talk show on what was called Gay Health Problems in a Straight Health System. So I was trying to raise that. This was before, of course, AIDS, HIV right. surfaced, but not long before. Within 2 years, we were dealing with a lot of other issues that were could not have been imagined. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that the kind of coming to Harrisburg fit in with that, and then there were people in Harrisburg who became friends through Dignity. And Dignity at that time, though it was called an organization for gay Catholics and their friends, it was often more friends than the gay Catholics. And it did play an important kind of social role in the community. I mean, it was a place that was safe for people to come to if they couldn't go to the bars or didn't know how to meet people. It was a place for people to explore the larger community, and often exploring the community is best done by somebody taking you by the hand. At least in my case, it is. And so I think one of the great things of those years, particularly the early years, was the gay volleyball at the police athletic league, which was this utterly dilapidated, bat-infested old building. But every week, I forgot what night it was, we had gay volleyball. And in the early years, I mean, it would be a triumph if somebody could get the ball over the net. You know? But any degree of competency was welcome. And for a lot of gay men in particular, the sports arena was the area where you were outed, if you will. You were shamed. And this was so welcoming and so much fun. And it went on for years. And there were other leagues then that developed that were more professional and played in the area. They may still. And there were some wonderful women. One was a gym coach, and she was so good with us and just got us actually playing pretty good. And Barb Disley, I think. Yeah. And she was a pillar, and I hope she still flourishes. Yeah.
Actually, she passed away recently. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
She deserves a reward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, were there other ways that you got involved with the community, or?
Yeah. The president at Dignity at the time when I came in was Jerry Brennan, who again was a small guy with a big personality, and
good way of putting it.
Right. He was an organizer. He was kind of out of the Saul Alinsky mode. He was big into the unions, the state employees unions, and used that kind of union organizing skills to push the causes of the gay and lesbian community forward. And he did amazing jobs. And so I remember kind of under being pushed by him, he always was on my case. And he was hard to say no to. And I used to avoid him sometimes, but I ended up doing work with the police department on what was called sensitivity training for gay and lesbian, and at that time even transgender community. And we used film strips and little talks. It was like very primitive. We use PowerPoint now, but I don't know if it made a difference. But the very fact that an openly gay and also a woman came with me, I forget who it was, we did it a few times and talked about this and issues around policing and domestic violence. And I mean, we're now realizing so much in terms of racial profiling and stereotyping, which we all carry with us, how this affects things like medical services or public safety. And so this was just the first forays into that. And then Jerry also said, they're advertising people for the Human Relations Commission in Harrisburg. You've got to go and be a Human Relations Commissioner. And I thought about it, and I did. So under Mayor Reed, who was the mayor forever, I became, I think, the first openly gay Human Relations Commissioner in Harrisburg. And I did that until I moved out. It wasn't a dynamic program, but it was there. And this municipality was really on the forefront of saying that sexual orientation is not a barrier to employment, to housing, to other fair practices. I can't imagine that 30 plus years later, people are still grappling with this. I mean, really. Yeah. it's like I'm old now. I'm retired. How did this happen? So.
Yeah, that local ordinance in Harrisburg was passed in 1983, I believe.
Yes.
And were you involved at all in the the hearings they had for it or anything like that? Or
I was not. No, I'm wondering if I'm wondering if I went on the commission right after the ordinance was
probably
passed.
You did.
And, yeah. And so it kind of filled some of the mandate of the ordinance.
Yeah.
It was pretty amazing, and there were some good people on it.
Yeah, that was the second in the second city in the state that actually passed one of those ordinances.
Okay. What was the first?
Philadelphia.
Yeah. Okay.
As you would imagine.
Yeah.
What else do you remember about your years in Harrisburg that might be remarkable to think about? Or
right. Harrisburg plays an interesting role in the state, I think. I mean, it is a small town, but it's where the state government is located. So it has impact, and it has kind of tentacles out, particularly to Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, and less so in those days up to the northeast, or the northern part of the state. There wasn't much going on, but even into Maryland and D.C. So I always felt that being part of the community, including especially the gay community in Harrisburg and central Pennsylvania, put me as a kind of honorary member in all these other places. And that was true even in the Dignity organization, that we were, it seemed, linked with Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Baltimore, Washington. And that made for a bigger world. Mm-hmm. I think that's one of the wonderful things about life here, is that you could and did get in your car if you wanted, and in 2 hours you could be in another larger metropolitan area with more of whatever you wanted. So.
Yeah, and Dignity was part of there was a regional conferences and things that they had. Were you ever going to any of those?
Absolutely, yeah. So I was regularly down to these cities. Mm-hmm. And those folks were regularly here too, which was an interesting thing for people from big cities to come back to smaller towns and see that stuff was happening. Mm-hmm. And many of these people also who were in the big cities started off in small towns. And so I think it was a kind of encouragement, a breath of fresh air, that even in a relatively modest metropolitan area like this, advancement can happen, growth can happen. Mm-hmm. I think what was interesting in Dignity is we brought in a lot of speakers, and some on particularly religious topics having to do with gay and lesbian issues. I remember that there was a famous Jesuit, John McNeil, who left the Jesuits, but he wrote a book on the church and the homosexual, which was groundbreaking. Mm-hmm. We had John Boswell here in his work, but then we had others, other politicians, the kind of Elaine Nobles, which were big names in the 70s and 80s. Elaine was the first openly lesbian legislator in Massachusetts, and Brian McNaught and others, who now are, I don't know, people don't probably remember them, but they were people who took great risks to to advance the cause for everybody.
Right.
Yeah. So I was grateful for our doing that and being part of that. Yeah. So.
And you would have been around for the 10th anniversary, I think, of Dignity.
Yes.
In '85.
Yep.
Do you remember there was like an anniversary dinner or something,
Yes.
celebration?
Yes,
for that?
I have photos of that.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. What are your remembrances from that?
I remember it was always hot in the summer, always bitterly hot and humid, because we would have these every year, and they were fun. And we did great Catholic liturgies. Like, there was this very ecumenical group, and apparently these Roman Catholic priests always enjoyed presiding for us because the liturgies were well thought out and not sloppy, and we would expect that of us. And but I remember that there were folks there from places like P-Flat, Parents of Friends of Lesbian and Gays, and that I always was moved by, even if it were only a handful, that folks could bring their parents. I regret that I never came out to my mother and father. It would have been somewhat premature to my mother, but I wish I could have to my father, and he died just as I was leaving Harrisburg, just about 2 months before I left. And like many people, it would have been a stretch for him, but I think he would have stretched and made it. Yeah. It's one of those little regrets.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Let's see. Anything else you can think of about your time in Harrisburg that you remember?
No, other than those wonderful picnics we used to sponsor at Dignity down at a state park towards Carlisle.
Yes,
Pine Grove Furnace.
Yeah.
Those were great. I mean, there'd be 75 or 100 people at them, and they were joyful. What I remember most, I mean, is the joy that started to dampen when people started getting sick with HIV/AIDS. We realized we were at a different place in our community journey. Particularly, who was very close to me was Gary, who was the head of MCC, Gary Norton, and he really was amongst the first to die. And John and I were just talking about it the night before last, and I remember when he was up at the hospital, and I said to John, "We're going to go visit him." And in those days, no one knew quite how the disease was transmitted.
Right.
So hospital staff was frightened, inattentive, and felt threatened. You had to gown up like a spaceman. And I remember going in, and the first time we went, and the only way we could really touch him was to massage his feet with oil. And John was reminding me of how angry he was at the last visit that this should happen to him. And it should never happen to anybody. But every time we do this ritual on Holy Week of foot washing, and I can't do it without remembering Gary. And my first Holy Thursday in the monastery, when my feet were being washed, I just wept and wept and wept, and I was weeping, I think, for the loss. By that time, I was knowing people who were dying, and it was a pretty quick, in many cases, a pretty quick advancement of the disease. And so I still have lists of names from those days, and I remember them.
So after Harrisburg, you did what?
I joined the Order of the Holy Cross, which is an Episcopal monastic community, and it has been around since the 1880s. I started visiting there in 1977, and I would go once or twice a year, and I loved the men, and I loved the place, and I loved the worship, and I loved the life. I saw it through rose-colored glasses, as one does in these things, but it seemed to...
I'm sorry, where was it located?
And it's located on about 80 miles north of New York City, on the banks of the Hudson River, right across from Hyde Park. And I decided that if I was going to ever do it, it was gonna be now. I could have gotten another job teaching, but I said, okay, I'm gonna try this. And I've been with them for 30 plus years now. It's a community of monasteries, and I was in New York for 6 months, and then went to our house in Santa Barbara for a year, then back to New York for a few years, and then was sent out to our monastery or priory, a house of studies in Berkeley, where I lived for about a year and 3 months, and then was back in New York, and where I was the kind of director of new men in formation, and then back into Santa Barbara, and I hope I'm back in New York now. I've been in New York since 2008 when I was elected head of our community. And I just finished 9 years of that, so I'm just at the beginning of a sabbatical. I'm going to be going to Cambridge and studying for a term in England. So, it's been an interesting, the community early on came out publicly against homophobia, sexism and racism. Like most monastic communities, whether they talk about it or not, there's, let's just say gay men are overrepresented, and we're okay with that. And the straight men have to understand that, we're not going to censor ourselves, that we are who we are. But that's always also a balancing act. We ask what is appropriate discussion, and then that's, you could comment on someone looking beautiful or handsome. Everyone does, but you don't want to get caught in a mental or spiritual trap of that, because we are vowed to celibacy and to common ownership of goods, and that's like everything. It's a growth thing, And I remember when I was leaving Harrisburg, there was a guy at volleyball who said, "Does this mean you're not going to be gay anymore?" And I said, "No, it doesn't mean that." I said, "I'll probably be gay in a different way, but that ship has left the dock long ago." and I'm grateful for my life. I'm grateful for my years here, and I'm grateful for the sense of dignity and integrity that was given me through organizations like that and through communities like this. I hope that there are similar supports for people who are still struggling with coming out. I mean, we still meet people for whom that's not an easy journey. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
so, what sorts of things do you do in your monastery, in your community?
Okay, where I live, we have a community of now 15 men, and we are in church 5 times a day. We also, though, have a large guest house, and we welcome over 3,000 overnight visitors a year. Yeah. We could take up to 44 guests. And they come from, groups, church groups, 12-step groups, other kinds of groups. Individuals come for programs that we offer. These are church folk or seekers who are just looking for a quiet place where they could find a sense of community. We tend to be more extroverted than most monasteries, so that we have breakfast is always silent, and there's silence from 8:30 at night until 8:30 in the morning. But there's talking almost always at supper, and the main meal and midday there's reading and then conversation. So people get to know us. We interact with our guests, and they bring us a living, because that's how we make our bread and butter primarily. But they also give us a chance to be human in a good way, a holy way, I hope. And we have a house in South Africa. We started a school there about 2010, which has been a headache, but it's starting to get on its feet. It's been a big financial challenge and administrative challenge, but it's good. It's good. So, and much of the last 9 years, I was traveling back and forth to South Africa and California and Toronto. We have a house in, so. Yeah. So, and we welcome people. I mean, we do things also. We have like crafts, and we paint, and we make incense, and we have a bookstore, and we and so on. But mostly I do a lot of meeting with people who just want to talk.
Mm-hmm.
So,
So you're using that background that you
Yeah.
had, and
yeah, kind of spiritual direction, though I don't call it that because that sounds too pompous. I said I don't do that, but I'll talk with you. So
good.
yeah.
Let me just see if there's things that I missed on our list here. I think we've covered a lot of this area.
I can't believe I've been so verbose. But
No, it's great. In terms of your life now, do you have any connection with the LGBT community at large, or do you?
not at large, but certainly on an individual basis. I mean, gay and lesbian folk are,
Everywhere.
constants in our life. Yeah, and what we're seeing, interestingly enough, is a number of people who are either exploring new sexual roles for themselves or are transitioning and are finding the monastery a safe place to try this out. So there's this one person named Tina who comes as a man and then all of a sudden appears in a dress. And some of their other regular guests, I gotten to the point of saying, Tina, that dress doesn't work for you, and then we have some folks who are transitioning who will come visit, and we have to be very careful of what pronouns we use. One wears a sign that says my preferred pronoun is they, and it's fascinating to see other issues, other things kind of playing out. And so, well, we're not formally involved, although one of our brothers, Brother Aiden, was the speaker at a big evensong service at a church in Greenwich Village at the end of the Gay Pride March. And it's on our Facebook page, Holy Cross Monastery. And it's a brilliant talk. He is an amazing guy. He's 30, he's a graduate of Yale and Union Seminary, and man, it challenges you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we're involved in that way, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's good.
Yeah.
Any important events or turning points in your life that we haven't really touched on in the conversation?
No, I think the interesting one now is coming to retirement age. I'm not leaving the monastery, but I'm in this transition period, and I'm asking myself, what's going to change? What am I going to do? How am I going to be? How am I going to live out my life, my vocation? And I'm more and more aware now that as people age, that's a big question. I've seen a lot of people at retirement age who want to have a conversation or direction, and it's a challenge. And I think probably for gay and lesbian folk, it's a big challenge. Before I came on retreat, I visited friends in Maryland, Jim and Tim, who got married a few years ago, but they've been together 35 years, and they just moved into a retirement community. They're the only openly gay couple. Mm-hmm. They're hoping to attract more, but they've been warmly received by most everybody, but not everybody.
Yeah.
So it goes on.
Yeah, it's a challenge with the aging population.
Yeah.
That we are all at some point going to have to look at those issues with where we're going to live, how we're going to live,
right,
all those things.
Yeah, and they had to make the choice about, what if one of us got sick first?
Right.
Who's going to take care of the other?
Right.
So they went into this thing, which is a stepped care thing. It's expensive, but they had the wherewithal to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah.
But no, that was the 65 is the big event that happened. I'm 68 now. So.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
What changes have you seen in the LGBT community, let's say at large, or anything particular that you want to talk about with that over the years from the time that you were more involved in the community versus now?
Yeah. Well, I think certainly the inclusion of the transgender population in the the sense of community has been a growing point. That is new. Even I was joking in my email to you. Even the Q, you know, the whole emergence of queer theory and the way people are able to articulate their being and study it, and that's totally new. And I remember, oh gosh, one event that I'll tell is when I was living in Berkeley. This would be '91. I was helping out at Grace Cathedral in San Francisco. It was the day of the Gay Pride March in San Francisco. I got on the BART in Berkeley, and it was just filled with these people having a wonderful time, enjoying who they were. And I thought, I started to cry. I said, I never thought it would get to this, that people could actually have joy and fun, you know. It blew me away. And I'm seeing more of this, where people are able to just be themselves, and be themselves in different ways. I don't always understand it. I struggle with what, you know, the transgender dynamic and the queer theory kind of, I don't get it. But there you go. So I got a lot to learn. But I see a kind of a broadening. My fear is, though, that there's also a alternative kind of narrowing. That, you know, there's a kind of a queer identity, and if you don't fit it, you know, you're. So I worry that we might get a little bit too narrow, and there's one kind of politically correct way of doing or being, and I would not want us to go there. We've gone too far. Yeah. Yeah. I hope that answers that question.
Were there any things in your life that particularly influenced the trajectory of your life, of what you decided to do and things like that?
Not really. I mean, often it was, like they say in AA, you do the next right thing as best as you could discern it or figure it out. And that's almost always how it's been. Yeah. There was no big trauma. I mean, it was like, you know, when I was leaving Harrisburg, it was because my job was ending. And so that became an opportunity for me to explore another thing.
Have we missed anything that you can think of?
Probably, but not that I could think of. So.
Okay, great. Well, yeah, if you know of anybody... Oh, you know, one thing I did want to ask you is, did you have any sense, because you mentioned a little bit about your uncle with knowing kind of the early Scranton history, and we don't have a lot of information about Scranton. Do you know much about the LGBT life in Scranton? Were you aware of it at all when you were there?
No, I really wasn't. I found out when I was approaching maybe college age that there was a gay bar in downtown Scranton, the Silhouette. And there may have been another one. I actually wish my Uncle Dick could do this at 92, because he could talk about what was happening in the 40s and 50s in a small town. Because it really was, you know, a salon society. And but life went on there. You know, I didn't invent this. So, although sometimes you used to think I did.
Is he in a position where he could be interviewed, or do you think he would do something like that?
I don't think he would.
Okay.
Although I might mention it to him. I'm going to see him.
If you wouldn't mind mentioning it to him, because I mean, we would love to get more information about the Scranton area, because even though our sort of area of the state that we cover is more south central PA, we've been getting stories from Williamsport and Scranton, State College. So we want to kind of brand, because nobody's doing it up there. So, you know.
And that there's a generation, but there are always generations dying off, and this stuff just gets lost.
Right. It's gonna be lost to history.
I will see him. Maybe I can.
Just
maybe I can
plant that idea in his head and see if he's interested. And
he's so funny. I mean, you would enjoy him. He is howlingly funny. So,
That would be good to
yeah.
meet.
And he's a great storyteller. So,
And those are
Okay.
information about our
great.
project. And this is just a brochure on the LGBT Center.
wonderful, wonderful. Okay.
All right. Well, this concludes our interview.